If it's okay with all of you, I'm going to sit. Just a little bit more comfortable that way. A quick story about sitting. Years and years ago, well, lots of years now, my favorite television show, and unfortunately I can't remember the guy's name, and I can't even remember the name of the television show, but it was broadcast out of Portland, and one guy sat on a stool for a half an hour and told a story. And I was absolutely fascinated. You know, I wasn't that into the cartoons, but that one guy just sitting there telling a story. And it's always stuck with me. I won't say I'm the best storyteller in the world, but I value storytelling a lot. Speaking of stories, on my way here, I was getting a little nostalgic. I was thinking about the talk, what I could do to connect with the audience, and thinking about the arc of my career. I don't want it always to be about me, but sometimes it is. And I realized that I kind of miss what it was like 30 years ago. When I first moved over to technology from architecture, it was a very nascent field. And it turns out whatever you drew was appreciated. There wasn't really much of a sense of what good or bad was, and nobody was making any friggin' money anyway. So there was no nervousness about it. Fast forward to today, and the field is insanely complex, and the stakes are ridiculously high. You know, the companies that have the largest market cap, the companies that are connecting with the most people on the planet, their connection to the people that they serve is through the things that we craft. We're at the front lines of the biggest industries, the most impactful companies and products and services on the planet. Now, I was originally an architect, and I felt like architecture sort of held that place for about 2,000 years. And that also meant 2,000 years of baggage. For those of you that, and I'm sure there were plenty in the room that were either trained or also worked as architects for a time, you know it's just like this ridiculously complex field. So much money is involved, so many people are involved. The aspirations of entire, cultures or societies are projected into these artifices. And after a while, you kind of get overwhelmed. It's why it's primarily an old person's profession. It takes so many years to develop the wide range of skills that are necessary to be successful. But one of the things I learned in architecture was that, very similar to what Anne said about ideas essentially being very easy, it's execution that's hard. It turns out that crafting nice objects is relatively easy compared to creating all of the conditions that are precedent, that are necessary to make that object exist in the broader world. So I work at Microsoft. Some of you have probably heard of them. And it's a 100,000 person company, and it's many, many $1 billion of revenue. And they have a modest goal of touching the lives of everybody on the planet. Satya's super, super passionate about this notion that computing and the power that computing brings should be available to absolutely everybody. And it's not that different a vision than Bill Gates had when he started. He just wanted to make sure everybody had a computer. And now, if you take that the next level, then the promise is all the things that having a computer are supposed to bring you. And so I moved from Adobe, had a blast there for 10 years, to Microsoft 2 years ago, thinking, oh my God, this is going to be a blast. The things they make, the things they do are so cool because they're a little farther upstream, right? They do a lot of the initial interactions, like with pen and touch and things like that. In Adobe, we'd had to sit around and wait until those things happen. So here I am right in the heart of it. And one of the first things I realized is I had no idea what I was doing. That's always a good thing. Like every once in a while in your career, you should take a job you can't do because you might learn something. And so I started right off realizing that by and large, they approach problems differently than I understood these problems should be solved. And I was trying to think about, like, what is it about environments that craft great things that customers really respond to? And so that's what this talk is about. That was a lot of preamble, but I'm just going to go into a few things that I've come to believe are at the core of creating great products and great experiences. And at the top of my list is love. I mean, it's really, really hard, like bear with me, to sit up in front of a bunch of really smart people and talk about love. First of all, I'm no expert. I don't have a show on great relationships or anything like that. But I was just struck in trying to craft positive, loving relationships in my own life, how much I've learned from that about what you have to invest to create great products. Also struck with that idea that when you're in an intensely intellectually biased, data-biased environment, and you start talking about what it takes to create love, to have people love your products, what you have to invest in terms of your own love for your customer and your products, how much it changes the conversation. Yeah, I have a quote here. In Maya Angelou, if you want to pick somebody who really does seem to understand love, Maya's a good choice. It's a great quote. And when I have this conversation with people, especially in businesses, this next quote comes to mind. Because there is that just sort of totally wacky, the things that you do that don't make any friggin' sense. Go back one. That might have been an inadvertent push on my part. There we go. This kind of in-the-moment, intense, defying all logic, this aspect of love is important too, but can lead to bad consequences. Like the first time I ever talked about this, thought about it, I thought about just passion. There's tons of research on high-performing teams. And they look at different criteria. What does it take? And I've looked at it myself. I've wondered, ironically, total tangent, but I started that product that's out there, and you guys should check it out, XD. Started that product on my team at Adobe about 3 years ago, and it got off to a really rough start. It floundered for quite a while. And when you have a product that's floundering, you're trying to figure out, like, what's wrong? Are the people talented enough? Is there enough of a technology bias there, understanding there? Or the designers strong enough? Do they understand the field? Do they understand the customer? And you can get all those things right and still have a crap product. Somehow, something clicks where you feel this incredible passion for the thing that you're trying to create. That passion gets infused in the object. And so when I talk about this, I like to talk mostly about passion. But when I say passion, instead of saying love, I tend to get this, the goofy part. But the point is this. When you're creating something, it's just a very, very different energy than when you're just doing production. And you have to sort of apprehend that that energy is either there or not there. And then it's your responsibility, if you want great things to happen, to figure out how to make sure that you bring that, not just bring it yourself, but infuse the whole team with it. You have to have this energy. I may not be getting along with this right now. Am I clicking and somebody else is clicking, or is it just, okay. So Zuck knows more about creating great products than I do, so it's easy to quote him. It's irrational at the time, selects for the people who care the most about doing it. And this is at the heart of it, when I said that you have to be passionate about it, but somehow you have to infuse that passion in everybody. entire team has to come together and share the same vision, share the same energy, want desperately for this thing to exist. The product landscape in our field is just littered with things that didn't quite happen. And I'm sure all of you, the number you have is probably directly proportionate to the amount of years that you've been in the field. You have those projects, you know, that you dearly loved, you thought it was the most important thing you've ever worked on, and it never saw the light of day, or died in ignominious death in public. I've done it, I've been there, I've seen it, and somehow there was some one part of that that didn't line up. Because if you get a diverse group of people, and we'll talk about that in a little while, that are all passionate about the same thing, and all aligned around that thing, and then you overlay the same passion from first potential customers and then customers themselves, it's a little harder to go wrong. There's still some ways, but it's a little harder to go wrong. So when I first got to Microsoft, I was pretty passionate about some of the things they did and maybe not so passionate about others. And after a short period of time, this is really getting weird. After a short period of time, they put me on a team that I was really struggling to figure out how to get my own energy up, the Office team. But if you look at it, there's a couple of things, there's a couple of different perspectives. The first is, Office has had a long history of being a trailblazer in interface. So my personal opinions about the ribbon aside, it was quite groundbreaking at its time, and it solved a really, really hard UI problem. And they've been able to have a major impact on the way people do work for a number of generations now. And then you go out and you look and you try to find, well, does anybody else feel the same way? And so this is a love poem. I won't read a bunch of it, but it's somebody who's incredibly passionate about Excel. Let's spread ourselves on sheets of love, turn our data into poetry. Cells shall merge themselves together, whilst you wrap your text around me. I mean, it goes on, and there are a ton of other examples that these products do inspire love. The easiest way to love somebody is to feel loved by them. It's not unusual to understand that it's a reciprocal relationship. And so went out, found some people who really love the products, and that's helped inspire me. Oh boy, this is getting on my nerves. Do we know what's happening here? Is it just not a good signal? If I hold it up like this, does it help? Okay, we can do this. I've already pretty much made this point. If you're in one of those incredibly data-driven organizations, if you're one of those people who's obsessed with personas, if you're one of those people who's designing things and you've right at the start said, I'm not the customer, I don't understand this, then you have adopted a level of dispassion that is not going to fail you, but it's not going to make you as successful as you could be. There's this incredible balance that we have to have right now. Like I look at, I have a little bit, I'll just be honest about this, which I don't know how many Microsoft people in the room or whether this is recorded, but I have a little bit of Amazon envy right now. Because somehow they've struck a pretty perfect balance between an intense amount of passion for the customers that they serve and the work they're doing, and they still have a strong, successful analytical bias. It's so easy to bang the corners. Like, it'd just be wacky, you know, it's free love, we're just going to make whatever we want, with no connection to data or the customer. Or to be so obsessed with the data that you end up with some other products that I just won't name. And the problem specifically is that if you collapse totally on the functional aspects of the thing, you're going to miss some of the most important aspects. You don't buy a Porsche or a Ferrari because it's functional aspects, because hardly anybody outside of some Formula One or Le Mans drivers can take advantage of the performance qualities of those things. It's a decision that you make from your heart or your gut or your ego. And it turns out that we're in an industry right now where every day people are making decisions that aren't very rational. So if you only invest the rational aspects into it and they're making an emotional decision, there's like a dissonance there. So you have to connect with the emotional part of it. I talked about this. Love's reciprocal. And I think there's some magic here. Like, if you want to be loved, you have to love back. If you want your customers to love your products, you have to love the product too. And I guess the corollary is you have to love them. I'm kind of liking this motion. Oh, it didn't work that time. So you inspire it by investing in it. It's pretty straightforward. So if you're coldly rational about your approach to the product, if that's what you invest in the product, that's what you'll get back from your customers. Now there's a place for that. So for example, if you're making a software for a very narrow audience and you're at that stage where your product is primarily only solving a functional need and you have one competitor and they solve that functional need a little better, then you could say you're still in the coldly rational phase. One of the interesting things about this whole arc is we all started there. Like, it was amazing 30 years ago when the product just did something and didn't crash. But we're just not there anymore. People are making choices the same way they make choices about fashion or about cars. I love this quote. It's a little embarrassing because you guys can look up Zig Ziglar, but he's one of those motivational speakers. But I think it's at the heart of what we're talking about here, right? If you give enough people what they want, then you get what you need out of it. And what we usually need is a successful product that we can be proud of. Okay, love inspires. This is really... I had the option to just put my laptop up here, and I probably should have. So the inspiration point is super, super important. Like when we're talking about different intangible aspects of products, one of the single most important ones is you're trying to get that inspiration out into the world. So again, not just the functional aspects of it, but the parts of it that inspired you are the same parts that are going to inspire those customers. You have to do better than just solving their functional needs. So what did you guys do today? You sat around and watched this guy try to click his thing. Oh, no, and then sometimes it goes twice. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit. If you think about love as the condition that you're investing, the environment that you're trying to create with a group of people that you're working with to create this product, and the idea that you're going to get that back, it's interesting to think about these things as ecosystems. Basically, everything you're doing is part of an ecosystem. That ecosystem can be the people you're working with, the company that you're a part of, the customers that you're a part of, and then the much more complex ecosystem about how your product or your service connects to all the other product services in the world. And what's remarkable about that is these are just patterns. These patterns can be pretty simple for a simple product. They can get incredibly complicated super fast. Again, going back to architecture, I did a lot of work in urban planning and urban design for the city of San Jose. And you realize that every single thing you did in a building or a park or a road had these amazing ripple effects, and not just the functional ones. Like, you didn't just move the traffic, you changed the culture. So we did some things early on had a lot of money, were rebuilding a city by displacing communities that were there. And at first we thought, well, we can solve that. We just find housing for them someplace else. But the downstream effects of the changes to the culture were pretty severe. And San Jose spent probably 15, 20 years trying to recover from that. So the idea is you think about everything you're doing as part of a pattern. If you just find a local problem and solve that local problem, you're creating 2 or 3 local related problems. And so if you just keep chasing down the problems all along and putting little Band-Aids on them, you're basically just making a bigger and bigger mess. Now there's a whole theory of design behind doing this. Ian McHarg, a landscape architect, talked about this. You just find, he would do these overlays of maps. You'd find where the drainage was bad. You'd find where the people have to walk. You just keep drawing over that, and you would, over time, come up with a, quote, solution that probably did solve most of the functional needs. And I actually, the reason I know about Ian McHarg is I worked for his firm, Walsh, Robertson, Todd, and McHarg. And so I was fresh out of college, and I was designing what I thought were really beautiful things that probably weren't. But I remember in particular, I was working on a transit station, and came up with this first idea. And the notion was that it was this beautiful line that had been drawn through the South Bay. And the line would warp up into the station and then come back down. And I was just in love with my work. You guys have all been there. Come on. You start there. And then they would say things like, well, you can't have that flat surface because people put trash on it. And so the designer that I was working with would just made it a slope. And then because they had made that a slope and because the trash will fall off, they put the trash can next to it. And then because the trash can was there, they had to turn the curb a little bit to get around the trash can. It just went on until that little beautiful line was completely gone. And as far as I was concerned, the design was destroyed. It is an approach to design. I don't think it's a very good one, and it's easy to get there. But a pretty amazing approach to design was presented by a guy named Wendell Berry, and he's sort of a, I don't know, agricultural poet. He spent a lot of time talking about the environment, and in particular on his little farm. And he thinks of everything as a pattern, and patterns within patterns. And so these next couple of slides are just things he said. He's also smarter than me, that I'm repeating. But the first one is you have to ask yourself for whatever you're making, what is sort of the low bar of just enough? You know, early on we had this thing where, you know, more was always better. And it's clearly not anymore. Anybody who's used any of Microsoft's software titles knows that more is not better. And in my previous job at Adobe, I can tell you the same thing about some percentage, which I won't exactly say, of Photoshop features are not just unused by some people, they're unused by pretty much everybody. Oh God, I got to do it. I'm going to run out of time before I get halfway through my slides, but I have to tell you a great story. So I first started at Adobe because of an acquisition. So I was the head of design at Macromedia. Had been there for, yeah, it's a great company. Oh my God, we were having so much fun. Another story, we were trying to recruit some of the Adobe's engineers. So we designed this poster and put it all over downtown San Jose, and it said, it had these black leather clad badass men and women marching down the street, and it said, our developers can kick your developer's ass. So, and then come join us. Anyway, I was going to tell a story. Oh, yes, you distracted me. Photoshop's was showing the top 10 features. And if you remember back then, that's how you sold a product. There were bullets on the box. And one of the features, well, 2 of the features actually, were super confusing to me. One was a new filter pack that did something with reds and whites to create more contrast. And then the other was this counter. And if you guys look in your copy of Photoshop, you can still find this counter. It just drops numbers down. And I was kind of like, what the hell is this for? Like, why does a designer count things? And they said, oh, they don't. We're looking at new opportunities to get Photoshop to a broader audience. And is it phrenology, the people who study blood? Somebody knows. What is it? Phlebotomy. Thank you. Thank you. They count red and white blood cells. And they actually do use Photoshop for this. There's a market of like, at least 100 people. But it's a great example of too much. It's also, we can do a whole nother talk on when you lose sight of your core audience. And Photoshop and all of Adobe for a time really did lose sight that this is their audience. They were about design. And I was really proud when we did the Creative Cloud work. Again, whole nother talk. Just the point is, you really always question, more is not better. More features does not create a better product. For a while, it sold products, and that's where the confusion comes. It used to be that you just added more features, and more people said, well, I don't have the new feature. It's just not true anymore. Another thing, and this one's one of my favorite ones, right up there with all ideas are emergent. What I mean by that is it's not actually your idea. And I know it feels good, but it's happening out there in the culture. It's happening everywhere. You apprehend it. And you're a lot better off feeling that way because then you're better at being a little bit more graceful about it, accepting other people's input into it, and understanding that you really do want to apprehend the patterns that are out there in the world. And so if your idea is super far-fetched, like if it takes kryptonite for it to succeed, it's probably not actually a good idea. And so it's a little bit of a conceptual leap because we're always striving to be original. We teach this into school. We love complexity, but the more complex the answer is, the less likely that it's the right answer. And there are always exceptions to the rule, but not many. When you're solving a problem, look at the landscape around you. Any real solution should solve more than one problem. The more localized you get, the more you're creating disturbances. And that's this last one. Anytime you solve a problem in a pattern, it should preserve all the other patterns around it. Now, if you think about Wendell's context for this, I think it's pretty instructive for the work we're doing. He's talking about ecologies. He's saying, that insecticide solves a local problem, right? It kills some bugs, so your plants don't get eaten, and then leaches into the soil and destroys the mineral balance of the soil. And then the plants don't grow again, and the people get sick, and the water gets polluted. So you kind of want to solve for the whole pattern, not just one part. Okay, next part. I told you before, right, that Microsoft has this vision, basically helping everybody on the planet do better. And this is the mission, specifically. Empower every person and every organization on the planet to achieve more. And I think it's a pretty audacious mission, and the odds of us are succeeding are quite small if we continue to focus narrowly on middle-aged, primarily guys in IT departments that install software in large corporations. Like going from there to everybody is quite a stretch. And so we've instituted some practices, and there's going to be a whole another talk on this that'll be tons better than what I'm going to talk about right here, that we call inclusive design. And the idea behind inclusive design is start at the edges. Look at the people who have specific challenges, whether it's a functional disability or a learning disability or limited access to technology. Look at anything that's blocking you. So you don't optimize for the top use case, the person with the best job, the biggest brain, the most money, and the biggest computer. You start at the edges and you work back. It has some really unusual benefits. it's a little surprising, right? Because you're usually optimizing for the person that's going to pay you the most money. Anyway, these next set are just people who have taken this to heart, and it's kind of surprising. Like when Vint Cerf was working on the internet, he was working on communicating with a deaf person. He wasn't trying to revolutionize the world. One of our own examples is Skype Translator. By focusing on something that was originally supposed to be just help a few people with language challenges, we started to get into the way people communicate generally and cut across all abilities. And then the important point of this is it's not really about a health condition. It's more about just a mismatch at any one time. I'll give you a specific example that we're working on right now, which is kind of a preview into the way we're thinking about design practices. We're spending a lot of time, and this is really, really new, thinking about cognitive load. It turns out that if you start with a blind person that's using a screen reader, and you start trying to experience the way they experience Word or email, the signal-to-noise ratio is ridiculous. Like, you'll get the title, the date, 4 actions you can do, like forwarding and saving or deleting. You'll get the first sentence, then you'll get some kind of other action, you'll get tags. It goes on and on and on. And then all of that noise that we put in because of the interface is followed by the way, how badly we all write. So you'll get like this completely junky email message because we talk differently than we write, substantially differently. And the point is, there's cognitive load all the way. Now we believe using artificial intelligence, we can actually solve for some of that cognitive load. So we're doing some experiments that at first were meant, again, just to optimize the screen reader experience. What we're finding is it's kind of remarkable. Like if your inbox is like mine and you're about 9,000 emails behind, having somebody summarize, categorize, and then just give highlights so that you can quickly scan them helps a lot. The other thing is at Microsoft, and this is new to me, everybody talks in white papers. Like if you have an idea, you write a white paper so you can get credit for your idea. And they put credit for everybody who was on the white paper. And then you're supposed to like read the white paper, then respond to it with comments and or write your own white paper. And I just can't handle that much communication. And so if you think about the structure of most writing, there's a few key points supported by facts and observations, and then there's more and more detail. If we could fold information so that it could expand and contract as you needed it, that we would get to decisions quicker. We would get to the real work quicker. We get to understanding quicker. And what's amazing to me about this is actually what's happening out there in the world right now. If you look at using Slack or our new product Teams, at least try Teams and let me know what you think, that we're communicating with much quicker little bits of information. We're making decisions based on those. We're not writing white papers to each other. And the whole point of the story is I'm learning a lot more about that by just spending time observing and trying to emulate how blind people interact with information. So again, there's going to be a whole talk on this that hopefully you'll all attend. But these are the steps that we go through when we're thinking about the inclusive design process, and it's having a real impact. It's an exciting new way for us to think about design. And I have clicked the button, so it might move. And then this is super, super important. The main reason that we need this, not only inclusive practices, but diversity across our company and across our ecosystem, is that it's almost impossible to climb out of your own biases. And so when you have somebody there that represents a different point of view, you're so much better off. Total tangent or non sequitur. There was a study on top performing groups that was done at Google. And they looked at, I talked earlier, about passion being my favorite one that distinguished top performing groups from low performing groups. They looked at experience, previous success, they looked at the diversity, they looked at talent. And you know what the number one criteria for them of a high performing group was? The one thing that they found consistently across the top groups? It was equal voice. It was the extent to which everybody in the space contributed. Now, I have a feeling that it's much more complex than that. Causal relationships are always hard. That probably has a lot to do with trust. It has a lot to do with everybody had something to contribute, which I think leads into diversity. But I just find it fascinating. It's not in my talk, but you got it for free. Next point I want to talk about is how creatives think, because it turns out that people who lean into creative fields actually think differently than people who don't. Surprise. And at the heart of it is we imagine futures. And there used to be a really cool image in the back of this. I don't know what happened to it. So most of us have been thrust into environments that are dominated by people who don't think the same way we do. And at first, it just creates a little dissonance. You kind of go like, well, wait a minute. This makes perfect sense to me. Why does it make perfect sense to you? That people who run companies or people who are responsible for implementing complex technology tend to lean into deductive and analytical thinking. It just gives them a little bit more confidence. But as Einstein liked to say, can't solve problems. We can't solve the problems that we created using the same kind of thinking. So one of the things that's nice, and it's definitely a big thing now. 10 years ago, I could get up on stage and talk about, no, you don't get it. Creative is going to be the next thing. What's the thing? So you guys already all know that. The jobs like my job didn't exist just a few years ago in big corporations. But I want to talk a little bit about that. So that last slide was deduction. Probably the most common thing you're taught in logic class. If you start with truthful, provable assumptions, you can get truthful, provable conclusions. And then there's induction, which is almost as good. If you have strong premises, you can verify things through those conclusions. So induction and deduction are the dominant ways logic is taught, and it's the dominant ways people who are extremely data-driven think. And it's also the dominant way that people who are responsible for, the weight of nations, the complex, really complex decisions outside of our present administration in Washington. But I said I wouldn't go there. But creatives think differently. And there's good study behind this, but it's not really taught in the schools. And it's a logical process. It's called abduction. And you start with the conclusion. And you have no friggin' clue how you have that conclusion. And I know that in schools we're taught, and in many work environments, we start from the Post-it notes, we start from the graphics, we go through this whole process to try to convince ourselves that this is either inductive or deductive reasoning. It's just not. At some point in the process of programming yourself to understand a problem set, you have a solution. And it doesn't just park on your shoulder and whisper to you. It's not mystical or spiritual. It's just that your brain is working the whole time, whether you're aware of it or not. And because you're a creative person, because you've leaned into that, you form pictures, you form ideas that you settle on too quickly. And then you go through a process backwards to figure out how that idea you have is true. It's super, super powerful. Never give it up. Hone it. Trust it. It's that difference that we provide to these other environments. Somebody keeping track of time?
5 minutes.
Thank you. So anyway, if you think about the rest of the arc of the talk, the beauty of abductive reasoning is abductive reasoning is better for understanding patterns. Abductive reasoning is better for inspiring passion, inspiring love. Like, it's really, really hard to love an entire board of Post-it notes. It's really, really hard to love a grid. It's pretty easy to fall in love with, to have your imagination captured, to be carried away by a compelling vision. And then you just have to figure out how to make it true. Just really quickly, it turns out that if you want to wrap this up one way, you can think of everything we do as very, very similar to relationships. Everything we want from a relationship with computers is very similar to what we want with our relationship with people. Understand your desires, anticipate your needs, foresee consequences, make connections. These things, are just stuff we need. Now, the exciting part is computers are getting better and better. Compute is getting better and better at actually providing these values. And I didn't write these. It was a science fiction writer. And I first got this about 15, 20 years ago. And I have searched the internet, and I can't figure out who it was. So if anybody knows, reach out to me. It's mgough@microsoft.com, and let me know, because I'd love to give the guy credit, or the gal. OK. I think this is just about it. But if you want to wrap this up in one way, you have to think about why are you doing what you're doing. If it's a job and you're happy to get paid, you didn't have to listen to most of the talk. All right, just keep going. Check in, check out. It's cool. If it's a career and your biggest motivation is to get to the next step, to have a better title and all that, that's cool too. I don't have anything against that. If you want to move the needle, if you want to move mountains, then it kind of has to be a calling. It has to be something that you can't not do. And I think that's true. That's creation energy. You get to the point where you can't not have this thing be in the world. And I think that's the goal for all of us. And then stop with another inspirational quote to wrap it up. If you look back and the things that you cared about the most, the things you're most excited about, and I know I have 1 or 2 products that are like that, 1 or 2 companies that I helped work with. That energy felt a lot like my relationships, or my better relationships without the counseling. But you do it in a spirit of love. You do it, again, like I said, because you can't do it. And I could go on about this a lot longer, but I'm pretty sure I'm out of time.